Good. Um, Welcome to the Geological Society of Glasgow's lecture. And today we're greatly honoured to have Megan Jacobs, who's a visiting researcher at the University of Portsmouth and is working towards her PhD at the moment, working on late Jurassic and early Cretaceous vertebrates, ichthyosaurs, pterosaurs, dinosaurs, all the usual stuff. And she's going to talk today about walking with giants on the banks of a 130 million year old river. So over to you, Megan.
Thank you, and thanks for having me, even if I'm hundreds of miles away on the Isle of Wight. Today I'm talking to you about the dinosaurs we have here on the island. So start off to give you a bit of context. This is the island, a geological map, and it's quite complex geology. There's been a lot of uplift and folding. So the lower half of the island you can sort of see here, this is all Cretaceous, and the upper side is Eocene and Oligocene. So what we're going to be focusing on today are these two red outcrops either side of the island. This is called the Wessex Formation. Is a bigger part of the Wilden group, so it's Hauterivian to Barremian in age, and it runs all the way through the middle of the island. And the best outcrops are along the beaches on the best of the best is the southwest coast over here. To give you an idea of where it fits in the Cretaceous, so we're looking at sort of early Cretaceous. We think it's about 130 to 125 million years old. But at the moment, there hasn't been any definitive dating of the strata because there's just not really anything to date. We haven't got any ash layers or anything like that. We're hoping maybe in the future there'll be sort of magnetostratigraphy where they use the magnetic fields to date the rocks. And we've also, I think, we've got some calcite dating, but that's not really sort of narrowing it down to as much as we'd like. But this is what the Wessex Formation looks like on the island. This is along Compton Bay, which is sort of famous for yielding its dinosaurs. So it's mainly consists of a lot of sandstones and mudstones. These are big point bar sandstones and crevasse splays, so the inside and outside bends of rivers. So we get some really nice sort of cross bedding, big ripples you can see in the bottom left, preserved in these sandstones. And it's also got some really nice paleosols, so fossil soils. And these are just, if anything, they're just really beautiful sedimentary structures. They're all different colours. They've got roots preserved in them. You can see where trees were, all this information. And it's just a lovely place to be. It's very wild down there. There's not a lot, there's no buildings or anything. It's a really nice stretch of coast, but these rocks are full of all sorts of fossils from this ancient floodplain. The most crucial part of the geology is we have something called plant debris beds. So these black beds you can see in this sedimentary log. So they're sort of scattered throughout the sequence without any real sort of correlation to where they're occurring. And they're usually sort of lenses. They rarely extend for long ways along the coast, and we think that these are the remains of flood, like big flash floods. Or there's another proposal put forward. They were a bit like billabongs, so a big pond on the floodplain, but they're cram-packed full of fossil wood. So all of this black stuff in here is all the fossil wood, and this is where most of the dinosaurs and the vertebrates come from, and most of it, almost everything comes from these beds. These would have been big flash flood events, we think. So in the dry season, there was big wildfires. So a lot of this wood is burnt, and some of it's even charcoal. So if you touch it and it crumbles and makes your hands go all black. So it's sort of the end of the dry season. You got these huge flash floods coming down, scooping up absolutely everything in their path and dumping them into big hollows on the floodplain. So anything dead and dying, stuff that just couldn't get out of the way, all of the wood, everything like that is dumped into these deposits, and they're amazing. These are the beds. If you come to the island, these are the beds that you want to target to go fossil collecting. So this is what we think the Wessex Formation environment would have looked like. So we've got this big dominant river running through the middle of the floodplain. This was been a west-east flowing river. So we think it started somewhere over in Cornwall and Devon, headed east over Dorset and then across the Isle of Wight in southern England. So, and we think there was a sort of a hilly escarpment to the north. There was a fault. It was sort of upthrowing the Jurassic strata, making it sort of a big hilly area. And we actually get some of these Jurassic fossils actually reworked into the system in the overlying rocks in the Vectis Formation. So we get sort of the Gryphea oysters, and we get Oxford clay and Kimmeridge clay ammonites reworked as well. But we've got this big river. We think it's about 1 to 2 kilometres across, which is just enormous when you sort of think of the scale of things, and a really complex environment around it. So you just sort of had lakes, lagoons, little ponds, patches of forest, a lot of vegetation. It was really quite a very unique and interesting environment. We got lots of different habitats, which then obviously means a lot of different animals are inhabiting that habitat, filling in all the different niches. So, I spotted a spelling mistake, sorry. So as of May 2022, there was 21 dinosaurs on the island and counting. So some of these were new the last couple of years. So we've got a couple of new spinosaurs that I'll go over later. There's a new raptor, a new ornithopod. We've got a bit of everything, and we know that there's actually more dinosaurs in there. There's new specimens coming out every year. Sorry. And people are actually starting to go back through museum collections and re-look at the bones that were found sort of 50, 100 years ago. They're actually realizing that, you know, these things, they're not just iguanodon, which is the most common one here. There are some massive differences that were never picked up on, and that's adding to the diversity. So we've probably got about 30 different dinosaurs here. Probably more as time goes on and people, continue collecting. But dinosaurs on the island, they all started with this man, Reverend William Fox, back in the 1860s. So he was a curate of Brighstoneus Church, which is on the southwest coast of the island. I believe he moved here from Salisbury. He sort of got relocated. He was always interested in geology, and so when he moved here, he thought, I'll go down the beach and see what's going on with the geology here. He started climbing the cliffs and things around Brightstone, and he started finding these bones coming out the cliff. So if you could imagine what was laying around, so there was absolutely no fossil collecting whatsoever. There would have been hundreds and hundreds of dinosaur bones in the cliffs laying on the beach. And he started before the word dinosaur had even sort of been invented. And he started finding these bones sticking out the cliff, and he became a man obsessed, which I think a lot of fossil collectors can kind of understand. But he got to the point where he was actually skipping his church duties. So there was reports of him sort of leaving halfway through a sermon because he knew the guides were good. He was bypassing the church completely to avoid going to work. He sort of he had a donkey to help him take his finds from the beach, going all the way around the back of the church to avoid the congregation. And eventually they started writing letters to the, I think it was the bishop in Portsmouth about him. And he said that he'd never leave this island if he has money to live on. He takes such a deep pleasure in hunting these dinosaurs. But over his time on the island, he had he didn't have that long on the island, sort of 15, 20 years. He amassed over 500 specimens, and he actually found 5 new species of dinosaur here. The most famous one's Polacanthus, that I'll show you in a minute. There's a little one called Hypsilophodon, which was mistaken for a baby iguanodon. And he found some of the new sauropods, the ones with the long necks and tails. And this is him here in his garden in Brighton preparing one of the sauropod vertebrae. And this is it actually in the museum. It's survived till this day. And I believe that the people that brought the cottage he used to live in, when they dug up the foundations for a shed, they found dinosaur bones in the back garden buried. And there was also dinosaur bones found in the wall cavities and in the attic of the house he was living in as well. So he was obviously sort of hiding some of these, maybe to get back to it at a later date. But this is the Polacanthus specimen he found. Polacanthus, a little armor-plated dinosaur. I'll show you some photos in a minute. And it's just absolutely incredible. So what he found here was the entire sacral shield of the animal. This is a portion of a sort of a big flat shield of bone that goes over the hips of the animal. And he's got this really sort of lovely ornamentation over the bones, sort of big spikes and lots of bobbly bits. And this is just, it's one of the most beautiful dinosaur specimens I think that's ever been found on the island. This is now in the Natural History Museum, in the stores. So if you ever get a chance to go in and have a look at it, it's well worth having a look. It's absolutely stunning. So this is Polacanthus. It's a really weird little dinosaur. So you can see the sacral shield over its back here. And it's got these huge spines going down the length of its body and down its tail. Big solid bone head. These are very, rare dinosaurs. There's not that many of them found in comparison sort of with other herbivorous dinosaurs on the island. The most common things you get are the bits of armor, and there's been a few spines turn up recently. But what the most sort of interesting thing is, we know that there's probably about 8 or 9 different skeletons found on the island of this dinosaur so far. Sort of bits and pieces have been coming out, but it's only about 2 or 3 teeth that have ever been found. And it's very curious. Their teeth have got this very nice sort of like leaf shape with the serrations, but they're super, super tiny. So it may just be a case that people aren't spotting them in the mud. And I've always thought when they've been worn down, they might look a bit like a fish scale, so people aren't sort of identifying them. But it's one of those sort of weird anomalies that you get sometimes. You find lots of a certain bit of the animal, but not a lot of the other bit of the animal. And I think we've only had 1 or 2 of the bits of skull found on the island as well. And you think for such a robust piece of the skeleton, like the skull is just solid bone, it might survive a bit more, but one of those things. So this is Hypsilophodon. This is another one that William Fox found. And these are lovely little dinosaurs. They're very small. They're only about 1 or 2 meters long. And they've got these sort of very sort of leaf-shaped teeth. The teeth go all the way to the back of the jaw, which makes us think that these were chewing their food. We think they may have had cheeks to sort of keep that food in as they were chewing. And when these were first found, they were thought to be juvenile iguanodon. So iguanodons are herbivorous dinosaur. They look very similar to a Hypsilophodon, but further studies sort of showed that the skeletons of these things were fully fused. There was a lot of differences as well in the skull. So it was at that point that these were just determined to be a different genus to iguanodon. This is what little Hypsies would have looked like. So you've got a nice little sort of small little head, very agile, graceful sort of animals. These are the 2 specimens that my friend Nick Green found, which is just, it's one of the most beautiful Hypsilophodons I've ever seen, almost completely articulated in white bone. You see it's got a nice sort of big, wide, flat foot, quite a sort of a slender tail. I've always thought that if dinosaurs were still alive, these would be quite good to keep as pets. You could probably have them in a field like sheep. But yeah, and we've also got there's a deposit called the Hypsilophodon bed on the island. It's further along the coast and sort of a bit more of the wilder area of the Isle of Wight. And we think it was sort of, there's been different speculations like a flash flood or a mud trap or something. But there's been hundreds well, 50 to 100 Hypsilophodon skeletons have come out of this deposit, and they're almost all complete and articulated, and they've ranged from tiny little baby ones through to full adults. So we've got a sort of strong evidence that these were really herd animals living in mixed aged groups, and it's possible that they may have looked after their young. You know, you can make sort of these assumptions, but we've got this brilliant deposit, and it's yielding some great things. And I think there was one from further up the coast where it was an adult curled up with a baby between its legs, sort of thing, protecting the baby. So it's really nice evidence to see that these dinosaurs were, you know, probably quite maternal. They're looking after their young. So this is to give you an idea of what we have to deal with on the island. So I think people, when they think of dinosaurs, they get this idea that it's all going to be like sort of the American Badlands, where you find a T-Rex skeleton in the cliff and you can dig it out over a couple of summers and then you can helicopter it out. But in reality on the island, it's not like that. Far from it. I wish it was. What we're dealing with here is moving cliffs. So the cliffs are pretty unstable. They're on the move all the time. We have the tide come in sort of twice a day. So if you don't get to a dinosaur on time, so if you don't catch it as soon as it's coming out the cliff, it's going to be gone. Either other people have picked it up, or it would have been lost to the sea. This is what happened with Valdosaurus. So Valdosaurus was discovered by a collector called Nick Chase, who's sadly no longer with us. So this is Nick here in the the wax coat. He was a brilliant collector along the island. He found this skeleton stuck out the cliff. So they did a dig to retrieve the animal. It's not very glamorous. It's digging around in nice sticky mud. But what they did get was a substantial amount of the animal. So we can see we've got everything from sort of the middle of the back all the way to the end of the tail. Almost every bone articulated, it's brilliant. It's one of the only sort of almost complete Valdosaurs we think we have. But it sort of hones down that point that if he'd got there sooner, we think there may have been the rest of the animal in there. Sort of everyone wants the skull, but this one unfortunately was already lost to the sea before he got there. But it's incredible what does come out. So we have these keen fossil collectors that go down every day, and I think this is one of the finds that they kind of hope for, and almost complete animal just laid there ready to dig up. So this is another one quite closely related. So Mantellisaurus, these Valdosaurus and Mantellisaurus are both smaller herbivores, kind of related to Iguanodon. They've got big horse-like head, big chewing teeth. This was another one that Nick Chase collected, so you can see him over here, and that's Jeremy there, another collector on the island. And this was another skeleton they got, I think, from relatively much the same location as the Valdosaurus. But this is really nice because it's an almost complete skeleton of the animal. We're only missing certain little bits of it. But these things, they start to add up. So sometimes you find the end of one bone 1 year, you find the end of another bone another year, and then a few years later, you find the middle of the bone on the beach. And I think that's what happened with one of these bones with Jeremy. He had both ends, and the middle bit didn't crop up for a few years later. He found it loose on the beach. So it's a lot of dedication coming down and collecting these animals over long periods of time. So this is our famous theropod we have on the island. So this was found by Keith Simmons, a local collector on the island, alongside an iguanodon, which is now named Brighstoneus. And this thing is incredible. They have almost a complete skeleton of this, and it's a very agile, we think it's an allosaur or carcharodontosaur. People sort of keep changing their minds. It's got a very narrow skull, nice big blade-like teeth for slicing through the flesh of other dinosaurs, big pointy claws. And it would have been about 6 to 8 meters long. So not something you really want to argue with, really. But a few years ago, the snout was actually CT scanned. So you can see the snout here. And the CT scan showed all of these vessels inside of the snout. And we think that these were like nerve endings, like sensory endings. The snout itself is covered in sensory pits. And this itself would have actually made the mouth of this animal highly sensitive. So we don't think it would be biting through bone. The teeth aren't designed for that. We think this sensory thing was so the animal could basically tell what was bone, what was flesh, and it might have actually also been used to sense different heat, and also in the water, a bit like crocodiles, they can sense things in the water. So it's an incredible adaptation for this animal. He probably knew sort of everything that was going on around him just through sort of the sensory pits in his snout. But he's absolutely beautiful. He's on display in the Dinosaur Art Museum. So if you're ever on the island, pop in there and you get to see the skeleton mounted, and it's on display. So this is our little tyrannosaur that we have on the island. It's called Eotyrannus. So obviously everyone knows about the famous T-Rex. When we do fossil walks here, it's all the kids want to find is a big T-Rex skeleton, and they're always a little bit disappointed when we don't find one. But this is the closest thing we have. So it's fairly small. He's probably only about 3 to 4 meters long. And this is an early tyrannosaur. So it's distinguished as being a tyrannosaur based on the fusion of the nasal bones and some other things. But the teeth primarily are very sort of T-Rex-like. They've got this D-shaped cross-section. So you can see on this tooth here, the serration here isn't on the back where it is on sort of other meat-eating dinosaurs. It's on the side. And this is actually, it creates a D shape, and that shape is amazing for biting through bone. It essentially, when they bite through bone with that shaped tooth, it causes the bone to shatter, and they can get to the bone marrow and things inside. So it's a brilliant little animal. I think there's only one specimen of it known. It's quite fragmentary. They've got bits of the skull, other parts of the skeleton, but it's not very well preserved either. We think because we've only got one of them, we think it might not have actually been living on the floodplain all the time. It might have actually been living up in the forests. So that's why we haven't got more than one specimen currently. Then saying that, new things are found every day. So, someone who might be very, very lucky one day might stumble across another skeleton of this animal. It does happen. So moving on to some very impressive things. So this is a brachiosaur vertebrae. So brachiosaurs are a type of sauropods, so the ones with the very long necks and tails. And this doesn't look like much. It just looks sort of like a grotty bit of bone. It's all cracked up. But what this actually is one neck vertebrae, a cervical vertebrae from a very, very big brachiosaur. So this vertebrae is actually over 1 meter long. So when you scale that up, if you've got 10 vertebrae in your neck, that's already a 10-meter long neck. And this animal comes in at well over 20 meters, which is just absolutely ginormous for this time period. Unfortunately, these are the only 2 that were found. So we've got sort of a fragment of one here, and it was found alongside the very big one here. But it's that evidence knowing that there are some really, really big animals in this ecosystem. They probably weren't living here all the time. They probably migrated through, because an animal that size needs a lot of food to support, just its basic metabolism. So we think that these big sauropods were migratory. They were going up and down rivers, constantly on the move, eating sort of everything in their path, because they had to support such a big sort of weight, really. So we have another type of sauropod here. It's called a Brachiosaur. So these are they're smaller sort of sauropod, really. And they tend to have these absolutely gorgeous vertebrae. They're very complex neural arches. So sort of this bit here. The centrum is this sort of the round bit at the bottom. And it just adds that sauropod diversity. So I think we have about five different types of sauropod on the island, which is actually, it's a really high diversity for an ecosystem when you think about the size of these animals. So just the ecosystem actually being able to produce enough food for these things is actually quite incredible. So this is a new one that my colleagues and myself described, called Vectiraptor. So this is related to Velociraptor. It was always known to be in there. Everyone kind of thought that it should be this sort of Velociraptor type thing. All the sort of the map showing the distribution of these things, there was a gap where the Isle of Wight was. And a few years ago, the guy called Steve Sweetman, he was doing a PhD sieving the plant debris beds I talked about earlier, and he actually found some teeth from these raptor-type dinosaurs. You can't really base a taxon on teeth alone. So he sort of wrote a paper up, described these teeth, and it wasn't until the early 2000s that local collector called Mick Green picked up these vertebrae on the beach. And a few years ago, they'd been in a bucket of water soaking to get the salt out. He decided to prep them up and see what they actually were. Sort of not really sort of thinking much of them. And it turns out they were completely different. And he showed them to myself and my friend when we were around. We sort of noted that, you know, these are actually completely different to all the other little theropods we have in here. And then you sort of start to do sort of comparisons with other ones, and we decided that it was new. He could name this. And he kindly donated them to the museum. So we called it Vectiraptor, which means Isle of Wight raptor, and Green Eye after Mick Green, which I think is very nice sort of tribute. This is what we think it sort of may have looked like. And it was only a couple of meters long as well. So not a very big animal at all. So this is another new one that came out a year or so ago. So this is called Brighstoneus simmondsi. This is named after the collector Keith Simmons, who found the Neovenator, and this was actually the animal that was found with it. So quite often on the island, when we find meat-eating dinosaurs, there is a herbivore in there with them. So it might have been a predator trap type situation, but it's almost guaranteed if you find a meat-eating dinosaur, there's probably an iguanodon in there with it. This is one of them. It's characterized, it's got this very big nose. So it would have had sort of a very big nasal. We think it might have used that for bellowing sounds or sort of display to attract a mate. You've got this sort of big red nose or something like that. And it's actually a type of hadrosaur. So this is slightly more evolved than an iguanodon, more like the ones from Africa. It's sort of that halfway point. But this animal is really cool. So it was first documented for having these broken neural spines, which is this tall bit of bone up from the middle of the vertebrae. And you can see at the top here, it's looped round. And this is where actually the top of the backbone's broken, been brought round, and it's regrown and sort of healed itself. And there's a whole series of these where it's obviously broken the top of its back, maybe something attacked it or something like that. And it's re-healed and carried on living, which is, I think it's more incredible than this actually being a new species, I think. Some dinosaurs show some awful injuries. They managed to get over, and it's really impressive. So these are two new dinosaurs that were found together. So they're very exciting. They're a type of Spinosaur, so related to the very famous Spinosaurus we get from North Africa. These were first found by a collector called Kai Bailey. I believe he found the very snout of this animal stuck out the sand, and that put them on to thinking, well, hang on, there is more of this animal here, and it's really, really cool. So they started collecting more and more of it. And when they came to prepare the bones and put them together, they realized they had two different brain cases, two different snouts, which led to it being two different animals. So the first one they described as Ceratosuchops. This is known from the brain case. You can see here in white and the snout here. And these are just absolutely, they're beautiful, beautiful animals. The other one's called Riparovenator, known from the same material, and I believe there's a tail associated with this one. So the one that's most famous from the UK is called Baryonyx. which is the Spinosaur found in Surrey, or I think Surrey. And we always thought we had baryonyx here. There was some vertebrae found that were described as baryonyx. The teeth were found. They've got very distinctive teeth. The teeth are very big and conical. They look almost like crocodile teeth. These were fish-eating dinosaurs. But the teeth on these individuals, you've got the big sort of very conical teeth here, but the teeth towards the back, sort of over here, that's still in the sockets, they've got this really gorgeous ornamentation on the enamel, and this looks more like Spinosaurus than it does baryonyx. So I think that might be one of the things that put them on towards it being closely related to Spinosaurus than baryonyx, which is just, it's really, really exciting. Really cool. And they've also got the part of the tail of the animal. These things were always believed to be semi-aquatic, or at least swimming. You can see from the tail of this animal, you've got these really high, thin neural spines, both on the top and the bottom. And they've got these weird zygapophyses where they kind of interlock and give it sort of a range of movement. And we think that these were probably more like crocodile tails, and they were living more like crocodiles, so spending a large amount of time in the water, fish eating, rather than sort of hunting on land like the other meat-eating dinosaurs we have here. So this is a restoration of the two new Spinosaurs, and this is sort of what we think they look like. There's a lot of bits missing, but more of this comes out every year. It's coming out of a landslip, so we can only hope that actually more of the animal is going to be there as sort of time passes. Be great to find that, the big classic hand claw that the baryonyx is known for. So not just nice big skeletons we find, you get lots of teeth turn up as well. Some of them are absolutely gorgeous. You can see a big iggy tooth here, a couple of theropod teeth. These are friend Mick's collection from over the years. And we also get more evidence of these dinosaurs, not just in the bones, but footprints as well. So you can see a nice footprint here. You can see the sort of the distortion around the sediment. This one was dug out, and you can see a nice big 3-toe footprint that's come out. These are big iguanodon footprints, so big herbivorous dinosaur. And this is the famous Hanover Point trackway. So this is at Compton Bay. These are coming out of a sandstone. So you can see this one here. You can see it's still actually in the cliff hanging out. And these are the infills of the footprints. So when the dinosaur was walking along through deep mud, it was leaving a big hole, and then that mud infilled with sand. When the riverbanks, it sort of burst over, and over millions of years, it turns into a sandstone. There's a whole mixture of different tracks we get here. We get mostly very big iguanodons. Some of these are over 1 meter long. But we also get some meat-eating dinosaurs in there, some sauropods, and some of the Polacanthus as well. So it's quite a nice sort of snapshot of how many dinosaurs would be living here. We think this might be actually been a watering hole, so a lot of them are coming down for a drink. But it's a brilliant location. If you're ever down, you definitely have to visit the Hanover Point trackways. It's incredible. There's about 200 footcasts on the beach right now. More come out every year. So yeah, this was taken recently. So almost every boulder here is a dinosaur footprint, which is brilliant. It's so cool. So I'll move on quickly to the pterosaurs to give you an idea of what else we have here. So we've got a variety of different pterosaurs. This is called Corkycephalus. It's a big toothed pterosaur. So this one's named after the Isle of Wight. The islanders are called corkheads. So it's sort of named after the corkheads as sort of a nod to the Isle of Wight people. This is a little tapijarid, so it's a little toothless pterosaur. This thing is tiny. It's probably a few centimeters long. It's the very tip of the beak. But my colleagues and myself managed to get a new genus and species out of it, so can't really complain all that much. This was found, I went around my friends and it was on his coffee table. So it's not every day you go around for a cup of coffee and there's a new pterosaur sat on a kitchen table waiting for you. So the next one's called Ischiodactylus. This is amazing. It's known from almost a complete skull. We've just got sort of a little bit missing here in the back of the head. This has got amazingly weird teeth. They're diamond shape. We think that probably a fish eater, and it's only got them right at the very front of the snout as well. Really, really bizarre animal. And these are found all the way throughout the sequence. Coloborhynchus as well is a very well-known pterosaur. It's found from almost all around the globe, really. And it's mainly known from these triangle snouts. It's got a very distinctive snout with these teeth coming straight out of its face. It's got these like massive, big arcing teeth. It's really, really distinctive. But quite often these snouts are actually, especially on the island, they're too rolled to get a diagnosis from. But there's been a few snouts found on the island, so it's definite evidence that these things are here. We've got different crocodiles as well. So this one's called Comptiodontossuchus. It's a bit of a mouthful. It's known as the button tooth crocodile. So we think this was a mollusk eater. So instead of its teeth being very big and pointy like that classic crocodile tooth, it's got these very short, stubby little teeth that are almost ideal for crushing shells and things. So we think this thing was actually eating mollusks rather than eating fish. And this one used to be called Goniopholis, but I'm not going to try and pronounce that name. So this is more sort of akin to like a saltwater crocodile, maybe. That classic croc that we all sort of know of. And there's a lot of other different crocodiles in there as well. They just haven't been very well studied. A lot of this stuff in here really needs people to come and work on it and look at it all again to figure out what's going on with the fauna. We've also got lots of different turtles as well. So this is a skull that was found on the island, almost complete skull. And this big lump of the shell, it's got this very distinctive bobbly pattern all over the surface. And we get ones that are completely smooth and then ones with ridges on. So there's different turtles in there as well. And again, it's one of those groups that people just haven't actually really looked at properly. There's probably a lot more taxa in there, but it needs someone who really knows turtles or crocodiles to go through and relook at all the material that we have. So talk briefly about the microfauna. So there's a guy called Steve Sweetman. He's here carrying his buckets of mud. So he started a PhD and he started sieving the plant debris beds in search of mammal teeth. So he sort of read in some old text that someone found a couple of small mammal teeth. So he thought, that's what I want to do. I want to see what I can find, sort of micro stuff in these residues. So he built a sieving station in his back garden, and it produced he got some amazing results. So these are just some of the things he found. So he's got new lizards, amphibians. So there's a little mammal teeth down here. I think this is a lizard up here, different sharks and fish. And this was amazing because it filled in like a big gap that was missing in the fossil record here. Everyone had just focused on the big stuff. No one had ever really bothered with the small stuff, sort of that would have been scuttling around between the dinosaurs' feet. We also have a lot of different plants here. The plant material doesn't actually tend to preserve that well. It tends to crumble away quite fast. So the best thing is to take a picture whilst you can, and that's the record of it. But we've got a lot of different pine cones here. So there's a couple of different varieties here, and we get these enormous logs washing out the plant debris beds. I mean, I think this one is probably about 6 foot long, a few foot wide. This one's definitely about 3 foot wide. They're absolutely enormous. We know that there's quite a lot of tempskia and monkey puzzle here, especially from the sort of the pollen side of things. We also get amber here as well. It's not very common, but when you find a bit, it sort of makes your day. This is a nice chunk I found earlier in the year. I was like over the moon when I found this bit sticking out. But this stuff occasionally has insects in. So we got a lot of different gnats, different flies. There's been a spider in there as well. And it's incredible that, it's just filling in all these parts of the ecosystem that you would probably never fossilize otherwise. We'd never, ever know about these insects if that amber wasn't coming out the beds. But this amber here isn't like the Baltic amber. It doesn't polish up very well. It tends to be very brittle. So you can see there it just falls apart. It tends to be very dark as well. So a lot of the stuff has to be micro CT scanned, or you have to sort of polish the surface and look through it to see what's in there. You don't get that nice honey-coloured stuff like you do in sort of the Baltic stuff. So this is a nice picture of what we think the Wessex Formation would have looked like. So you've got a big river with the big dinosaurs and things in there, big mountain range and things. So I'll just talk quickly about some research that we've been doing on the dinosaur gastroliths here. I'm not sure on what my time is. If I go over, someone please stop me. So we've just been looking at sauropods. So the sauropods, these are the dinosaurs with the long necks and tails. They're sort of separate from the theropods and ornithischians, so the herbivorous dinosaurs. They've got the big long necks and 4 pillar-like legs, and these are the ones that get massive. So here in the Wessex Formation, we have 4 different types. We've got brachiosaurs, diplodocids. These are like Dippy from the Natural History Museum in London. Rhybachiosaurs with the big long whip tail, and the titanosaurs. These are the ones that just get massive. So to give you an example, like Argentinosaurus is the biggest one that ever lived. So we think it was like 40 meters long and weighed about 110 tons, which is just nuts for anything living on land. Absolutely ginormous. So this is a couple of some of the footprints from these animals. So you can really see this one here is just enormous. And these are a couple of the bones from the animal. So you can see the size of the backbone. And so David here with one of the femur. And it's just incredible to think that these animals actually, walked on our Earth and got to that big. It's mind-blowing, really. So we've been looking at gastroliths. So gastroliths are the stomach stones. So we think they swallowed them to help aid in digestion. So they didn't have sort of grinding teeth like the iguanodons and the hypsies. They've got these peg-like teeth. So we think they're literally just biting branches off and swallowing them. So they were swallowing these stones to help grind down their food in the stomach, a bit like a gizzard in modern birds. But instead with the gastroliths, they actually developed a high polish within the stomach. We think it was the silica in the food they were eating was giving them that polish. So these are some examples of the gastroliths we get here. So if you're ever on the island, occasionally you'll see a big rock stuck out the cliff. It just doesn't look like it belongs there. And these probably are the gastroliths. You can see the shine on this one. And these we get several main lithologies. So we've got a Portland limestone one here. This is a bit of, I think it's called like a serpentinite or a jasper. These are a quartzite crystal. These are Tempskia. We got a quartz and a sort of silicified quartz. So these are all really, really hard rocks. And we can see that we've kind of got sort of an almost even distribution of some of the things. So mainly limestone, chert, sandstone, siltstone, and the quartz. But what we've actually been finding, so these are just some sort of nice pictures of the tourmalinized sandstone. You've got these tourmalinized crystals in there. This is what the wood looks like under the microscope. We had one pebble that we didn't really know and thin sectioned it and it looked like wood. But the lithologies of these actually pinpoint to where they come from. So we're getting half are coming out of a Portland Purbeck boundary. So they're the Portland limestones. We're getting actually bits of silicified limestone and the cherts, and they're probably coming out of a basin eroding about 15 miles away from where we're finding them. And then the next lot are a lot of very high sort of silica content, very, very hard rocks with the tourmaline in. And we think that these are coming from probably about 90 miles away, so similar to a Budleigh Salterton type deposit, which is a Triassic river conglomerate. So these are coming from Brittany. They're getting washed across in the Triassic, deposited as a conglomerate, and then they were eroding out into the Cretaceous. And I think it's incredible that these dinosaurs were walking 90 miles to get to their gastroliths. So we did an experiment to see if you can develop a shine using just plant material. So we chucked some rocks in to a rock tumbler. You can see after 24 hours, it creates a nice plant soup. And this is the result. So you start off with an untreated rough rock, and you get this nice polished rock. And we did this because there were some people not thinking these were gastroliths because of the polish. You couldn't get a gastrolith from the plant material. but this is enough evidence to prove that the silica in that plant, the silica crystals, actually act as a fine polish. So I'd just like to say thank you to all the collectors and fossil finders on the island, because without these people, they would be lost to the sea. We wouldn't have the science that we have, and all the academics that research these fossils and bring them to life. So thank you for listening, and do you have any questions?
Well, thank you very much for that, Megan. A great introduction to the geology and the dinosaurs and all the other reptiles that were around in the Isle of Wight. To begin with, I don't know whether anybody remembers this. Maybe you, or maybe you're too young. There was a Time Team episode where they looked for the Hypsilophodon foxeye beds, and my impression was that they weren't particularly successful.
No. There was, I know they did a Channel 4 dig where they dug the Hypsilophodon bed for a week. They found nothing. And then actually a local collector went down the day after the dig finished and he found one about 3 foot away from where they were digging. So, yeah, it's about luck, really, I think. Yeah.
The Hypsilophodons aren't in a single layer, do you think then, or do you think they're in pockets?
I think they're kind of spread out. It's one layer that yields them, and there's a layer further along the coast. And there are layers that, if you find one, you'll find a whole one. But they're not sort of in big clusters, if that makes sense. They're kind of sort of spread out through the layer. So yeah, it's not guaranteed you'll find a Hypsi if you go down.
Any questions from the floor? Yes.
Up here in Glasgow, Megan, we're in Carboniferous territory. One word fossil that I've been learning all about up in Carboniferous here, which you've not mentioned, is coprolites.
Coprolite. Yeah.
Right there.
Were you able to make that out?
I heard coprolites. We do get coprolites.
Yeah, that's the important word.
Yeah, I sorry I didn't put them in. Yeah, no, we do get coprolites here. It's a real mixture. Quite a lot of small ones we think come from crocodiles, but I've seen some big ones that have been collected as well. But there doesn't tend to be a lot in them. You sort of just get these sort of coprolite shaped rocks. There can't really be much else.
But no one's done any sectioning of them to see if there's plant material or fish material.
I don't think so. I've had a couple break open on me, and you can't see much in them. I don't know if it's a preservational thing. Sometimes you can see sort of fish scales and little bits of bone on the surface, but I don't think there's actually been a study where people have sort of actively cut and polished them to see if there's anything inside. Probably something for for the future research. So.
Yep. Any other questions?
I've got a question that's when people want to pick up a fossil and take it away. Is it actually a central area where people bring things, or people just carry them off back to the mainland? Is there any rules of what happens to the fossils you find?
Right. The question is, it seems to be a bit of a free-for-all for fossil hunting in the Isle of Wight. Sorry, getting my islands mixed up. Are there any specific regulations governing what happens to fossils, and where is there a central resource where people can take things to?
Yeah, so there's the main museum on the island's called Dinosaur Museum in Sandown. But when it comes to collecting, it is kind of a free-for-all. If it's loose on the beach, you can pick it up and keep it, basically. There is no rules to say, you have to take it to a museum to be identified or anything like that. If you're digging something out of the cliff, or you find something out of the cliff, you have to get the landowner's permission. So here on the island, I'm not sure how it works up in Scotland, but the cliffs are actually owned by the person who owns the field on top. So it varies between sort of along the coast who owns the land. So quite a lot of it's national trust. So you have to get the landowner's permission to dig, and quite a lot of the time that then has to go to a museum. That's part of the deal with the landowners. There is this big thing, we want people to be more sort of let the museum know what they're finding, because there's a lot of collectors on the island. There's a lot of people come down on holiday and find stuff and then take it away with them, and it's splitting up dinosaur specimens basically, because one person gets one bit of bone, one person finds the other end. There's no real conversation or anywhere where people can go and sort of show each other what they found and put bones back together. So it is a big issue on the island, with a lot of dinosaurs being separated, and it makes doing the science on them harder, because you're dealing with quite a lot of fragmentary remains. You're not getting a true sense of really what's coming out of the rocks, and what is there, and the completeness of these animals. So we don't want fossil collecting to be banned. That's the thing. You can do really harsh or very lenient, but it'd be nice if there was somewhere where all the finds were registered or reported, just to keep a record of what's coming out.
Yeah, in Scotland, the regulations are a bit complicated.
Yeah.
In some places, the landowner owns the land as far as he can ride out to sea in a horse and throw a spear.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is also owned by the Crown as well. But we do have a fossil code, which helps people to understand the value of fossils to science. And in there, they name a number of places where people can take fossils to get them identified.
Yeah.
Something to think about for the future.
Yeah.
Really.
It'd be nice to have something like that. But yeah, at the moment it is a bit of a free for all.
Any other questions? Yes.
Did you find any evidence of skin or feathers or anything on this side?
The question was asked that thanks for the talk.
Yeah.
and also is there any evidence for the skin? You're showing reconstructions of the animals, obviously paleontologists produce fantastic reconstructions based on very little evidence. But is there any evidence for the skin and feathers of any of these animals that you've been looking at?
I know that there was some skin impressions found with one of the iguanodon type animals back in the 1800s, I think. But other than that, there's not a lot on the island. It may be a case of it's there, but people are preparing it off, or the conditions just aren't right for that sort of level of preservation. The one with the skin impressions didn't come from the Wessex Formation. It came from the formation above, which is a lagoon environment. So it's a complete sort of, it's got complete different preservation in that sort of environment. But it's another thing, we don't get dinosaur eggshell either. So it's a very acidic environment. The soil is very acidic. All the calcite's being dissolved away. There's not a lot left except just the bones, and in some cases they're quite eaten away as well. So yeah, fingers crossed one day it'd be nice to find sort of like a mummified limb or something like that, but nothing yet.
Do you have a question?
Yeah.
The question was about the speed of erosion of the cliffs. You're saying that as soon as something appears in the cliff, people have to pretty much collect it, or at least prepare it out to the cliff before the next tide. Is that how fast things are eroding there?
Yeah, it varies from place to place. So some bits are going a lot more quickly than others, but like at the moment, there's almost every day there's big cliff falls. There was a big landslip where we've been collecting some dinosaur material, and then as soon as that hits the beach, the tide just takes the mud away. There was sort of like a mudslip that had come out. Me and my dad put a flagpole that we found on the beach, sort of 5 foot back in it to see how quickly it would gone. And within a couple of days, the flagpole had gone. It had taken all of that mud away. So stormy conditions like this with wet cliffs, it really goes very quickly. And it is a case of you see it and you have to dig it out, because otherwise it won't be there after the next high tide.
Any other questions? I'll ask one more question before I pass it on. I thought it was a bit unusual that you'd have two spinosaurs so close together. I presume you've already thought of sexual dimorphism. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, it's one of those things, I don't want to slate their paper or anything, but they were found together in the same bed, and the differences between them aren't huge. One's slightly bigger than the other one, and one's got a crest and one hasn't. And everything, the consensus kind of is between sort of the other half of paleontologists is it's probably male and female, rather than two different. It's very unlikely you're going to have two different genera and species buried together at the same time in the same mud, bit of mud. I think it'd be more exciting if it was sort of put forward that these things are male and female. That would be really, really cool. It'll probably happen at some point. The paper will get written up, but yeah.
I mean, it is very difficult to assign a gender to any dinosaurs.
Yeah.
I think they've tried that with tyrannosaurs as well. The females are bigger than the males, and that's about as far as it goes, really.
Yeah, I think there's one dinosaur where they've got quite a few specimens of it, and there's differences in the pelvic structure. So one's a lot wider than the other one. So they think that the wider one is the female for laying eggs, and the narrower one's the male. But yeah, it's very difficult. Without all the soft tissues and things, and you not seeing what's going on, it's difficult to say.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Megan.
Right.
I shall pass you on to Gary Hoare, whom I think you already know.
I do know Gary.
Hi, Megan.
You're right.
Yeah, very well. Listen, thank you very much for that, and thank you for standing on at short notice.
That's all right.
You didn't get a lot of time to prepare, of course, and yeah, the talk's been absolutely fantastic. So thank you from all of us at the Society.
That's all right. Thank you.
And I'm also wanting to come back to the island now that I've seen this again. My hammer's itching to get back. Yeah. Anyway, thanks again. Cheers.
That's all right. Thank you.
Did you hear the round of applause?
I did.
Just one note for Society members: we're looking for new members of the committee for the council, and make sure that you do let somebody know who's on council. Their emails can be found on the website, and we're looking for as many of you as possible to help run the Society. And if you have any useful suggestions for the Society, this is your chance to do that. So make sure that you get in touch with somebody on the council, and we will welcome you with open arms.